All right. So my name is Nakia Strickland, and I serve as the Associate Director of Diversity Engagement in the Office of Alumni Relations at the University of Louisville. And I am very excited to see all of you here this evening for this amazing conversation with even more amazing, phenomenal panelists that we have with us here today. But before we jump into our conversation, I will now turn it over to Marian Vassar.
Thank you, Nakia. And I'm not going to speak long because I want to hear the panel. That's why I'm here. I just wanted to bring you greetings on behalf of the University of Louisville. I'm the Executive Director of Diversity and Equity at U of L, but this is a collaboration between our office, Diversity and Equity, the Alumni Office, and the President's Office. If you've attended a previous session, you know that there is also a book study that is taking place alongside the community conversations. There's a cohort of people, I think it's staff, faculty, and maybe even a student or two. We meet monthly to actually work through the book. I always remind people we don't just read the book. I tell people you can go to the library for that, but we're actually working towards an action step. So we have people often email us and say, well, we keep hearing that you're trying to be anti-racist and you're calling other people to be anti-racist. What is that? So Nubia is going to give you an official definition, but I just really broadly want to tell you that it's an acknowledgement that institutions, policies, and practices were designed for a specific group of people, white people, and even more specific, white cisgender men. And so when you think about what it means to become anti-racist, and it's not something that you achieve, it's something that you are constantly working towards. Think about all of those institutions and policies, if they were not created for us and in a holistic, inclusive view, what can we do to make sure that's the case? So it's really about dismantling, reimagining, constantly asking why, so you'll hear people say things like, well, that's not professional. Well, somebody at the table needs to say, well, what does that mean? And who got to determine what those standards are? And then we're going to work to make sure that whatever this new thing that we create, it really includes everybody. So it's deracializing behavior. And again, just acknowledging that the institutions, the policies and practices that are in place were designed for a specific people and a specific community. So how do we work or reimagine it in a way that it works for everybody? So today we're going to focus on white, Black, color, and body. If you've read the book, you know that those are specific chapters in the book. And I'm going to turn it over to Nubia, who's going to introduce our fantabulous panel. And because I'm trying to be anti-racist, yes, I did just make up a word because that's what you can do when you're trying to create something new. So I'm going to turn it over to Nubia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nubia Bennett, and I am the program coordinator for diversity education and inclusive excellence. And I'm getting my slideshow prepared for you all. All right. So again, I want to welcome everyone to the Becoming Anti-Racist Community Conversation. This is presented through the Diversity Education and Inclusive Excellence Office, the Office of President Neely Bendapudi, the Senior Associate Vice President for Diversity and Equity and Alumni Relations. Every month, we present an installment of this series based on a topic in Dr. Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist. And as we said before, reading this book is not required to participate in this panel, obviously. But I did want to let everyone know that we are giving away free copies of the book for registering and completing our survey to let us know how we can present these community conversations in the best ways that meet you exactly where you are. So if you'd like a free book, and also if you'd just like to tell us about ourselves, please, please, please look out in your email in the next week or so and fill out those surveys because we want to be the best that we can be. And just letting you know that our next community conversation will be in June on June 21st, same time, same place. And that will be our final installment of this series. So now that all of the housekeeping and all of that has been taken care of, I really want to move into some shared definitions to make sure that this isn't alphabet soup, because that's what doing this work and talking about this work can become. That's what I call it anyway. So I like to start with shared definitions of some words we're definitely going to hear tonight, but we often hear all the time when we're talking about racism, anti-racism, and all of that. So tonight's definitions, and some of our panelists may have additional definitions they want to share with you, but some of the ones that were highlighted this time are colorism, which will come up today, which is a prejudice or discrimination, especially within a racial or ethnic group favoring people with lighter skin over those with darker skin. Post-racial, something that we're definitely not in. Having overcome or moved beyond racism, having reached a stage or a time at which racial prejudice no longer exists or is no longer a major social problem. You know, that's not true. Racist, what does that mean, right? One who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. I also like to double down on the fact that racism is very specifically racial prejudice, but also social and institutional power. So that means that you can feel, that's the difference there between prejudice and racist. Always important to add that information. And then what does it mean to be anti-racist? Someone who supports, actively supports anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing anti-racist ideas. So those are some shared definitions. Like I said, the panelists may have additional definitions for you all. Now we're going to get into our fantabulous, to use Marianne's words, our panel. Because every single time that we have a panel, I'm like, oh, this is the best one yet, because I get all excited because I always say that there are so many people out here doing the work already. And in this time, in this age and time, we're like, oh, how can we get involved in this work? I'm gonna create something new. Definitely, I don't discourage anybody from trying to create things new. But one of the bigger things that we wanted to push for this community conversation is highlighting folks who are already doing work, because what we can all do definitely is contribute to the work by tapping in and listening to what is already happening. So that said, with tonight's panel being about body, color, white, and Black, these are the folks that we have that are already doing work. First, I'm going to start with Ms. Farron Harris, who is going to be talking with us about body. And Farron Kia is her pen name, and she is a self-published author, podcast personality, and the creator, founder, and CEO of Love Thy Belly, LLC. As a body positive activist, it is her mission and purpose to change the narrative of the word fat from a negative one to a positive one. Through field work and experience, Farron puts herself and other plus big fat people in positions to be represented through fat positive work. She has a website. You will have access to that. And her book is Dear Fat Girls When Love Isn't Enough. She is also a graduate of the University of Louisville. So, you know, we have to give love to our alumni, of course. We also have Dr. Michael Wade Smith, who is the Chief of Staff and Vice President of External Affairs here at U of L. He provides executive leadership to facilitate the accomplishments of the President's strategic agenda. He provides strategic direction, leadership, and oversight of the people, projects, and operations of the Office of the President. He is a senior external affairs administrator for the University of Louisville, and he leads the offices of communications and marketing, community engagement, and government relations. He holds a bachelor's degree in English and American Studies and an MBA in marketing from the University of Kansas and a doctorate in higher education management from the University of Pennsylvania. And he strives to enhance the reputation and expand the impact of the university in the city, region, and the world. We have Dr. Tamara Adams, who holds a PhD in social work from the University of Louisville with a postgraduate certificate in psychoanalytic therapy from Bellarmine. She's a licensed clinical social worker, dean for the undergraduate education at Spalding University, and associate professor in the Pan-African Studies program and School of Social Work. She's involved with NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising, Louisville Collegiate School Board of Trustees, Kentucky Commission on Healthy Children, National Council of Black Studies, Kentucky Association of Blacks in Higher Education, and Kentucky Association of Black Social Workers. She's also a Gardner Institute Fellow for the Excellence in Academic Advising Program. She researches and teaches on racial identity development and retention of Black students at predominantly white institutions, Black women's identity formation and assessment in academic advising. All these very achieved people. I'm having a hard time because it's so long, right? This is great. And then finally we have, last but not least, we have Carla Wallace, who grew up between a Kentucky farm and Amsterdam, Netherlands, where her grandmother had hidden people fleeing Nazis under the floorboards during World War II. So she comes from folks that have been about this work for a long time. She's been involved with social justice work for over 45 years. She's co-founded Louisville Showing Up for Racial Justice and co-founder and leader in the National Surge Network. She's been mentored by Southern civil rights activists and the Black Liberation Movement and biracial justice fighter Ann Braden. She's the co-founder of Louisville's Fairness Campaign. She helped establish the University of Louisville's Audre Lorde Chair in Race, Class, Gender, and Sexuality. And she's an inductee in the Kentucky Civil Rights Hall of Fame. So these are just some folks we have. These are the folks we have in front of us today. So I'm going to be quiet because I want to be, and I'm going to let them do their thing because I'm just excited to listen. So I'm handing it over to Theron first.
Wow, Nubia, that was a great introduction. You can do all of my introductions for everything that I do. Hey, everybody. My name, as Nubia said, is Theron Kia. I am an alumni of the University of Louisville. I have been doing fat positive work for about 10 years of my life. And a lot of what that looks like is really me sharing my own lived personal experiences with people and them sharing their lived personal experiences with me. And us coming together, creating this collective of ideas and journals and sharing these experiences and putting them in positions to be represented, because a lot of times bodies, especially plus bodies and fat bodies, especially Black fat bodies and queer fat Black bodies, which is what I embody complete as a part of my identities, is what I embody. A lot of times we're misrepresented in a lot of ways. And so a lot of what my work is delving into that and figuring out ways that we can share our narratives and share our stories, the multi-layers that exist within those stories. Nubia knows me, and Marion knows me, and Dr. Adams knows me, and Nikia knows me too. I read the book, my section of it, and it was definitely about a Black experience within racist communities and within America. And with, especially if you do currently live in the city of Louisville, you were able to witness what that looks like in our own hometown, or for those of you who live here and are from here in your hometown, and witness firsthand what racism against a Black body actually does look like. So as many of you know, last year we did have a Black woman, Breonna Taylor, who was murdered by the police. And she also is a larger bodied woman from what I can tell. And as someone, again, who does fat work, I don't think that she received the justice, obviously, but also the recognition that she deserved. And I think a lot of that does have to do with her body as well as her being a Black woman. And so a lot of what the book talked about is how one of the specific quotes was, "We were unarmed, but we knew that Blackness armed us even though we had no guns." And then a lot of times that is what it's like being and existing in a fat body, is that you are automatically assumed to be a threat, or you're assumed to be something that needs to be kind of, in a sense, categorized and contained and controlled. And I think a lot of what we experience as Black bodies, and especially as fat Black bodies, is policing in all forms, whether that be physical policing by the police or societal policing or policing from people within your own home. And so just to kind of like marry the two of the book with the work that I do, a lot of that exists in representing fat bodies, representing our narratives, and letting people know that there's so many multi-layers to what this existence really is, that just existing as we are is not only an act of resistance, but it in itself is very anti-racist.
Thank you, Farron. I love what you're saying in terms of existing is resistance, because you exist and you embody who you are, and there's just all this layers of oppression around it. Thank you. And so now we're going to speak with Michael Wade Smith, because he's going to talk to us about Blackness. And at the end, after we go through everyone, we're going to open everything up for questions. You can start posting them in the chat, and we're going to get to those. And we will also feel free to unmute at the end and ask questions as well. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Farron, for your comments, and Nubia and Marion, thank you for continuing to engage our community in this important conversation. I appreciate it. I'm excited to chat with everyone a little bit more tonight about Chapter 11, Black. And I won't live too deep into the text, but I'm an English major as an undergrad, and I love a deep exploration of a book. So I've got to do that just a little bit. And to start that out, I want to center us in the actual argument that Kendi is making throughout the book. In some ways, he has a really simple argument. We've lived in a world where the binary of race and racism has been on a spectrum of racist to not racist. Kendi's big thought, and he wasn't the first one with this big thought, but he's certainly the largest popular acclaim with this thought, is to change the binary, not from racist to not racist, but from racist to anti-racist, so that there's action on both ends. Because you can be not racist and not be doing anything. Kendi's argument then is saying, if you're not doing anything, that is an action. There is a choice there. Your passivity has some connection to the dismantling or reinforcing of the system that we're currently in. So that's the big contribution of Kendi. There are implications for that for every different identity and every different segment that he talks about in the chapters of the book, including for Blackness. And I'm excited, Nubia, that you teed me up so well in your introduction. I'm going to have to push back on you, not from my words, but from Kendi's words. In this chapter, he pushes back on what he calls the powerless defense, which he defines as the illusory, concealing, disempowering, and racist idea that Black people can't be racist because Black people don't have power. So there's been a fairly common refrain in this work since the 1960s that Black people can't be racist because Black people don't have power fundamentally. Kendi pushes back on that pretty strongly throughout the chapter and really throughout the book, to say that in the world we currently live in, Black people do have power. That power might be limited power. That power might not be the majority dominant power of whiteness that does control this country, but it doesn't control it absolutely. Kendi makes the argument, I think this is incredibly sophisticated and right, that buying into the notion that Black people can't be racist is reinforcing a similar thought process as a white racist might use, that diminishes Black collective power and further expands white collective power, saying that we don't have resources, tools to fight back against systemic oppression. Now, that's not to say the people who say Black people can't be racist are wrong. Again, we're in the academy. There are lots of different ways to view the same thing. And that idea that Black people can't be racist that evolved out of the 60s was for a reason, because white people in power were saying that policies that were intended to be anti-racist were really evidence of Black and brown people committing racism against white folks. So the argument then evolved for Black and brown communities to say, we can't be racist. We don't have power in this argument. But that took on a life of its own in a way that has come to define this conversation in a way that I would argue is unhelpful. Because if you look at the Blackness represented on this call, if you look at the Blackness represented in this Louisville community, there is power. That is not to say that it is absolute power, but if anything has been proven since May and June of 2020, is that there is extraordinary Black power. And when focused, when centralized around a couple of things, we've seen more movement in some ways in the last 10 months than we've seen in a long, long time. And I would argue that a part of that reason is in fact Black power being focused. One of the things that Farron said, I wrote this down, that links to this chapter, that too often Black folks are categorized, contained, and controlled. This definition of Blackness in the old framework, the racist to not racist framework, where Black people can't be racist, is in some ways a powerful play at categorizing, containing, and controlling Black narratives. It's putting the onus elsewhere, when really Kendi's call, and I think what most Black folks do intentionally anyway, is form complex network, is to create complex community to move things forward. And I think Kendi's call is just a call to say, let's recognize that as power. In white communities, or in a system structured under white supremacy, very often white leaders can move on their own, can move individually with significant power, and that isn't always present with Black bodies. But what Black bodies have done incredibly well over time is we create complex network, complex community to expand power in really meaningful ways. So one of the things that I like to contribute in Louisville, and I'm gonna get to do this more and more now that we open back up, is I very intentionally try to create Black community. I hold Black cocktail hours, I hold Black parties. I like Black people coming together for the reason that Kendi perpetuates in this chapter, that it is in that shared connection that movement can be created and catalyzed. There's also a lot of good research on Black solidarity and how it's worked over the last 70 years. I can send some links to Nubia and Marion to share with the group. But it's interesting that when society is in a place of increased tension, when I will use the Trump presidency as an example, that was a period when society was in a period of increased tension. Whenever there's a period of increased tension, happened around 9/11 also, it has happened at other significant inflection points in history, Black solidarity increases. Black people will self-report that they have more Black friends, that they're spending more hours of their week in Black community, that Blackness links to Blackness in moments of tension. And if there is not an expression that there's a problem in our system, it should be that as tension decreases in society, you can see networks start to expand. And as tension decreases, we turn in towards the people most like us, which probably isn't a huge surprise, but think about the applications of that on a large scale. As I was thinking about this conversation, what Kendi's definition had me thinking about was really about internalized racism and internalized oppression. Again, another whole space of scholarship that I can send some good links on. Kendi wrote that he spent a lot of time thinking about good Black people and bad Black people in a way that furthered the problem that he's trying to fight against, to create more anti-racists in the world. And he said, every time I say something is wrong with Black people, I'm simultaneously separating myself from them, essentially saying, and I will replace what he said with bad Black people. And when I do this, I am being racist. I think it is a lure for Black folks in power, I will include myself in that group, to find yourself in places where you have to, where you don't have to, where you feel like you might have to critique Blackness or critique Black people in really problematic ways. And one of the parts of my journey that has been very important over the last 10 to 15 years has been trying to find a way to make my Black consciousness more singular so that I can't separate myself in those moments, so that I can't, in a white dominated or white controlled space, can't find ways to castigate Black individuals or Black community as a whole. And that is a practiced behavior. If you are someone like me who is half Black and half Mexican and grew up in a rural white community in Western Kansas, that is something that has to be learned and practiced. There are times in my life when I lived in meaningfully Black community, but I have a Black identity that has developed over time. And while the world engages me immediately as a Black man, I think of myself as a very complex intersectional person, that Blackness is a part of that, an important part of that. But one of the things I think is important to hold about this chapter is that regardless of the intersecting identities, because Blackness is transparent and we cannot hide from it, that Black identity is so incredibly critical to center and to understand both the elevators, the buoy you get from that, but also the internalized inferiority that sometimes comes from it. So if you look at racism and oppression as a whole, they sometimes say there are 4 foundations of racism: oppression, privilege, internalized inferiority, and internalized superiority. Inside of internalized inferiority, you'll often find in many Black individuals at different times in life that they carry internalized messages about themselves and other people that are negative, other Black people that are negative. We believe something's wrong with being a person of color or being a Black person, that we might have lower self-esteem, senses of wrongness. Even now, as a vice president at a Research One university, I am almost always the last person to speak in a meeting. And I just won't do it. I say in my head, oh, so they all know that. They absolutely have that idea. And you might call it what's it called when you doubt yourself in these roles? I forget the term. Lord, someone knows. What's the word? There's imposter syndrome. God, I couldn't get it. Thank you, whoever jumped in. You might brand it as imposter syndrome, but I can link it to race. I can absolutely link it to race. I can hear my dad telling me that you can't fail in these spaces, that you have to outperform. You can't give them a reason to doubt your intellect. So not speaking is a strategy to wait and make sure I have 100% of the information. Yet I'm in conversations all the time with people who clearly are not factoring in the same information before they speak. One of the more compelling things I think about internalized inferiority that I think is related to what we're seeing in the world right now is that internalized inferiority creates in Black people and people of color a false binary that there are only 2 ways to show up. One is to act within the system, to support whiteness, to continue to uphold whiteness. And the other option in this binary is to act out, to disrupt, to burn it down. And what I would offer in this conversation is that is an unhelpful and foolish binary, and nothing has ever been achieved in this world in such simple terms. Again, and I will go back to the previous point, Black people work in a complex way and use complex networks, and that is an expression of the in-between of acting in and acting out. We're currently in a world where the easiest thing to do is to take to Twitter, to go to the newspaper, to record some snarky lecture, podcast, or whatever, regardless of your belief, whether it's very progressive or very conservative. That is the tactic of the day. But systems move through really intellectual, complex actors, through people working at a solution, not from one space, but from multiple spaces. And I worry that in the world that we're currently in, if we create a binary of action between acting in and acting out, we can't achieve the anti-racist positions that we're moving towards. I know I've taken too long, so I will start when Marion turns on her camera. I know that means that I've said too much. So just a couple more points. The W.E.B. Du Bois and his dual consciousness, which I think will be discussed in an upcoming panel, is the idea that Black folks are at all times thinking of an assimilationist mindset, one in which you are viewing yourself from white people's eyes and in the white world, and one that's an anti-racist construct, where you're living in your identity as a Black person, and that at all times, in every conversation, in every movement, you're holding both an anti-racist and an assimilationist perspective. One, think about the weight of that. How could that not turn into internalized inferiority over time, to constantly be holding two battling perspectives of self in literally everything you do? Just hold that concept for a moment. What's it like to say hello to someone in the morning, holding how you want to show up with that hello and how they are internalizing your hello every single step of the day. The weight of that should feel like something. Kendi's anti-racist call, and this is a call that before Kendi was one I've been trying to work in my life, and I haven't mastered it yet, but I'm a hell of a lot better than I was 20 years ago, is the goal of anti-racism is to find a way to eliminate the double consciousness, to eliminate the dual consciousness, to live in single-minded, whatever your identities are. For me, it's single-minded, Black, Mexican, fat Western Kansasness. That's the single consciousness I need to level down to, and not try to also live holding an assimilationist view of what the people with power, what the white folks around me are trying to also hold about me. That is hard work. It is hard work when you've been trained to feel inferior by individuals in society, by your own Black family members. That is hard work, but work that is certainly worthwhile, because we want to push back on the idea that Carter G. Woodson, who created the idea, one of the initial fathers of Black History Month, said, when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him to not stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and stay in it. So you want to make sure that your mind is liberated, that your single consciousness is pushing you forward, so you don't succumb to those very things. Two last quotes and then I'll be done. On page 149, Kendi wrote, I began to silence one half of the war within me, the duel between anti-racism and assimilation that W.E.B. Du Bois gave voice to, and started embracing the struggle towards a single consciousness of anti-racism. For me, that's the challenge of this chapter, and my challenge to the folks with multiple identities. And there are many identities on this call. It's certainly true for Black people. It is true for many identities as well. And then a quote that is important to me, because this work is hard and there are a lot of folks doing this work, regardless of the identities that they hold. It's very easy in 2021 to be cruel. It is very easy in 2021 to have doubt. The quote that I always go back to is Socrates, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. This battle is one of those, but it's not the only one. And it's important to remember to be kind. So look forward to discussing more.
Listen, thank you very much, Michael Wade Smith. I really am excited about exploring the nuances of all of this, right? Because that is really what we have to get to. And this idea of complex community and its implications around collective impact. That just took me where I needed to go. So thank you very much. Moving on, we're gonna now talk about color with Dr. Tamara Adams. She's gonna take it away. Look, I don't have to add anything else. I'm just gonna let you do what you do.
Hey, good people. So, listening to Michael Wade Smith, I felt like I'm just going to go in a completely different direction. And it's between what it is that you shared and between what it is that Farron shared, I'm going to start with just my personal experience, right? This is a chapter that I teach as a full semester course. And so to try to put it all in one chapter, even as Michael Way Smith, as he said, it's a lot to unpack. And even with what he shared, there's a lot to unpack. So this is my story. Those of you who know me know that I was born and raised in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. If you know it, you know to call it Hoptown. And in Hoptown, the nice, I don't know, I guess it depends on the person. The nice part about being from Hoptown is that it's about somewhere between 32 to 36% Black population. So for it being a small town in Kentucky, I see a lot of people that look like me. We have a lot of shared spaces, but in certain spaces, we did not represent. We were not represented in certain spaces. That means that advanced classrooms, that means in show choirs, that means in leadership positions in schools and in the community, we were not there. We were not reflected. And growing up, you all can see I'm a lighter skinned Black female. Back then, I got my hair relaxed starting when I was about 3 or 4 years old. I won't say 3, I was 4 or 5. My mother has very fine hair. She didn't know what to do with my hair. And I was very tenderheaded. For those of you who don't know what tenderheaded means, it means I cried every time she combed my hair because she didn't know what she was doing and it hurt. And so my dad was finally like, if you don't go and take that girl to get her hair done and get her out of this house so I don't have to hear it, do something. I'll give you whatever money to go get that done. So I started getting my hair relaxed very young. And as I grew up, and I'm gonna fast forward this, I grew up, I started to realize, my mother, I clearly knew I was Black. So if you read books like Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, and you hear about Janie and she saw herself in that picture and she didn't recognize herself because she knew she was Black, but she didn't show up. She didn't think she was showing up as Black. And she saw this picture and was like, who is this girl? That wasn't me. I knew that. I knew who I was. But because other folks in my space saw me as this light-skinned girl with this long hair, there were certain stereotypes that came along with that. And that's part of what Kende talks about in this chapter, about what it means when someone only sees a light-skinned girl that is coming into a space. And then there are assumptions that you are willing to have a Eurocentric view of what beauty is, that you're willing to assimilate. And so what he doesn't really necessarily talk about is that intraracial dynamic, and that there is a dynamic within the Black community, right, that we don't often talk about, even though we say we recognize that we are not a monolithic community. Recognizing and allowing space for that to show up becomes problematic, right? It becomes a bit confusing. So as I grew up, people would ask me if I were Latino. They would start to speak to me in Spanish. I took French. I didn't know what they were saying. And they were like, you're not mixed? And I was like, no, I'm not mixed. But it became a point of, why can't I be Black? Why can't I just be Black? And I don't have to claim Cherokee. I don't have to claim some, whoever my ancestors were that assaulted members of my family to give me this lighter skin, right? It's not that. I'm just Black. And so fast forward to my teaching at U of L, and I was in class, and typically when I start a speech, I introduce myself as a Black female. I'm a single mother. And I go on from there about who it is that I am, the identities that make me up, and how I present as a consequence of those identities. And so I did that with my class this one time, well, one of these times. And there was a young woman who was struggling with her identity. And she said to me, why would you want to identify first as Black and then as a woman, knowing the struggles that Black women face in this world? Why would you do that? Couldn't you just say you were a woman, or couldn't you just say that you were whatever other identity? And so it started a conversation for us about how she came to her own identity. And so I share that in this space because Kende was doing the same thing. He was trying to figure himself out in this book, and he did a whole lot to try to figure himself out in this book. And I would think that there are a lot of Black people and white people too who are still trying to understand really where they fit in this world. And there is a level of comfort that can come from being willing to assimilate, being willing to give into this notion that somehow you fit in because of the color of your skin, or because maybe your ideology can make you more of the white. I think, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said, money whitens if your skin color doesn't, right? How it is that you begin to utilize what we would contextualize as power. And this is where I would argue with you, Michael Way Smith, of the distinction between power and influence. When it is that you are able to truly be at the table to make the decisions versus influencing the decision makers. And it's not to say that I don't believe that there aren't Blacks who aren't racist, because I do believe that that is the case. Understanding what we do to each other with that intraracial dynamic, right? But I would argue, and even with the examples that Kende has used in the book, he talked about slaveholders who got their freedom and then purchased slaves to work their land. That there's a disruption in their psychological well-being to understand what Freire talks about, right? As this pedagogy of the oppressed. We can't make it until we assume the characteristics of the people who have been oppressing us for all of this time. So then color becomes the embodiment of what that is, right? We have to define it by the color of our eyes, or the texture of our hair, or the shape of our nose, or the width of our hips. However it is that you want to start to kind of pull these elements together to say what color is and the value of it, right? And that's what I always get back to when I talk about this, is when you place the value to it, that becomes the point of contention, that point of tension, I guess, that you talked about, right? Of when you start to place disparate values on what it means to be a lighter skinned Black person versus a darker skinned Black person. And what you find, and he didn't fully go into this, is how it is that we have benefited from that. So he talked about the slavery piece, and what he didn't really unpack as there were biracial people born out of these, I don't know what you want to call them, during slavery, whatever, you can use whatever adjective you want to use. But once you have people that were born of that, there were some slaveholders who said, well, you're my child. I'm going to make sure that you get a chance to access education. I'm going to send you abroad so that you can get educated and come back. Or I'm going to teach you a trade. Or I'm going to do this. What they don't say is that some of the lighter skinned Blacks that were working in the house were being raped and assaulted on a daily basis. That isn't privilege. That is not a privilege. What they didn't say is that the women, the wives of the slaveholders, who knew that these were the bastard children of these individuals, were beating these women and scolding these women as often as they could to belittle them, to advance their own place within that household. That's we don't talk about that. We just talk about the house Negro and the field Negro and the lightness and the darkness of the skin, but understand that both of these entities were being abused, right? And really having some kind of compassion for those shared experiences. And we miss those opportunities. And I think that we continue to miss some of those opportunities to have conversations, identifying what's happening within the Black community, because we're so busy trying to fight what's happening to the Black community. And so anyway, I know I'm starting to go long now. So let me say this piece, these couple of pieces, and I will be quiet. Part of this goes back to, and this is what I think is important for us to think through a little bit, and it goes back to some of what has been said. Cross talks about racial identity formation. There's that pre-encounter phase, right? Where, you all talked about it already. You want to distance yourself from somebody Don't put too much focus. It's when the news comes on and a crime happens and you say, please, Lord, don't let them be Black. Don't let it be one of us, or let me distance myself, because as Kende talked about them, that's the bad Black people kind of behavior, not my kind of Black people behavior, right? That's still living in that pre-encounter stage. What I would argue is right now, we are in that encounter moment. That encounter moment, and my students, and you guys know, those of you who've had me know that I use this, is I tripped, oops, I realized I'm Black. Let me be mindful of this for a minute and what this lived experience brings. So in Cross's time, that was the assassination of Martin Luther King, because King was assassinated. He was preaching peace. And so at the point at which somebody is advocating peace and trying to insinuate change in our country, but is assassinated, that woke a lot of people up, right? Like, dang, if they're going to kill him and he was preaching peace, how are the rest of us going to be safe? I realize I'm Black. I got to do something with this. And as a consequence, they go into that next stage of immersion and immersion, right? Of let me get really into this and understand what it is to be who I am in my space and have some pride in that. And so taking those Black Studies classes, I always say Black Studies is the first anti-racist something. So this has been there since the start of Black Studies, right? So if you want to know how to be an anti-racist, start to take some Black Studies courses wherever you are, and just delve into it. And so that way you understand how it is that you can make a difference. Don't be silent. Ask those questions. I'm sure Michael A. Smith ain't quiet too often, though. I'm sure he's going to put his foot up in something real quick in a hurry if somebody steps too out of line. But, I guess I'll just simply say this. There are plenty of ways that we cannot show up. And part of that is not just, and it goes back to what Farron said, by not seeing yourself, not knowing who you are, is that first place of where you don't show up. If you don't understand who you are, if you don't know what you're bringing to the table, and if you don't know how that can start change at whatever level you are occupying, you're missing it. So that's the first step in being an anti-racist.
All right, so I'm always glad that I'm on mute when everybody else is talking, because I was over here clapping and snapping. I was trying, yeah, she dropped the mic, exactly. I'm really excited about this idea of nuance, right? Because we're really delving into just the nuance of talking about which is better, like light skin or dark skin, whatever. But if you both being abused, but really, is there better, right? That's invigorating. Okay, but so that it doesn't become me on a soapbox, because I'm not on this panel, I'm just moderating. We will be moving to the Carla Wallace, that's going to talk to us about whiteness. So I'm gonna be quiet.
No. Oh my gosh, you all, what a powerful panel. I feel like this could be like several symposiums with all of this, just so powerful. And who's here says something about who organized it. And I really want to appreciate the folks who led and organized it and who are leading this effort. Louisville's my home. The first time I was part of anti-racist action was outside the Brown Theater, where they were showing Porgy and Bess, and Black people were not allowed in there. The first time I was at U of L's Grawemeyer Hall was in the mid 80s. That's 1980s, with a big group of students occupying a Board of Trustees meeting, bringing a demand that the university divest its stocks in then apartheid South Africa. To its credit, the university became the first in the South to divest its stocks from South Africa. So white people, rich white people to be precise, created race and created racism to make super profits off of Black bodies, steal indigenous land, steal Latinx land, and to maintain power by dividing those who might otherwise join together for change. So there's a role, might we say a responsibility for those of us who are white, to play in ending white supremacy or racism. And in Surge, we use those terms together, racism, white supremacy. It's the work of my life and why I co-founded with Pam McMichael, who's also on this call, Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURGE, a decade-old national network answering the call from the Black Liberation Movement of 50 years ago for white folks to organize our own. The majority of white people in this country are a barrier to progressive change on any issue that matters to us: racism, environmental justice, gender justice, LGBTQIA equity, economic justice. Yes, on every one of these issues, the silence or the complicity, the outright complicity of white folks helps keep oppressive structures in place. And the task of those of us who are white, is to get more white folks to come over to the side of change, equity, racial justice, or we're not going to be able to make the progress we need. And I want to share 4 points on that are also inspired and resonate in the Kendi readings. One of those is that a lot of white folks want to stop at fixing our own behavior, but it's bigger than attitudes and behavior. Kendi says that those of us who consider ourselves anti-racist focus a lot on individual everyday white people, trying to get them to act right, and then we go down this rabbit hole and very little changes. He says, in losing focus on racist power and who has that power, racist policies, budgets, institutional culture, then we fail to challenge institutional racism. So this cannot be about personal change for white folks only, though that's important and needed. All the white folks could get on top of our microaggressions, and guess what? White supremacy would continue because it's also cultural, institutional, structural, and systemic. You know, speaking of institutional, I'm excited that the University of Louisville, or any institution for that matter, wants to become anti-racist. But one thing that's critical for us is that that path has to center the voices and the solutions presented by those who are most impacted. Issues being raised, and I've heard them from the students of color on campus, are big ones, like the relationship with LMPD, with Mitch McConnell, the burden that Black and people of color carry at U of L or any institution to be the ones to make it better for all of us. There's actually a 13-point guidance letter written by directly impacted faculty and signed by many students, faculty, and staff last year in the midst of the Black-led uprising. This letter addresses concerns that, if taken seriously, could really shift things at University of Louisville. And so for those of us who are white, our role is to push more white people to support those demands that are being led by faculty, staff, and students of color. And I think hopefully somebody has the link and they're going to drop it in the chat to that guidance letter. The next thing is that Surge, the organization I'm with, takes a mutual interest approach, meaning that we support white folks to see that a vision of change that's put forth by progressive Black and POC communities, and check out the Movement for Black Lives Vision platform if you haven't seen it yet, will actually benefit us all. You know, white folks get in this place of, oh no, if the Black people get something, we're gonna lose, right? Kendi writes about how white people are conditioned by white supremacy culture to blame non-white people for struggles they're going through, struggles like poverty, low wages, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of medical care, when instead, and I quote Kendi, any objective analysis of their plight primarily implicates the rich, and I would add the white rich. During the pandemic, and for some, because of the pandemic, 650 of the richest people have gotten richer during this past year, not by millions, but by trillions. Find an organization to work with. Come do it with, I'm talking to the white folk, come do it with Surge if you want to. Right now, we are going door to door in primarily white communities, knocking on people's doors about ending cash bail, which is a racist policy that holds people in jail just because they can't pay to get out. Finally, if those of us who are white and consider ourselves anti-racist spend most of our time running white people off rather than bringing them into the movement for change, we are not going to build what's needed. It has been people of color, Black women in particular, who have talked to us at Surge and said, you white people, if you're just mean and elitist to other white people, you're not going to bring white people in, and that's not going to help us at all. And so we believe in calling people in, not out. I'm not talking about those in power. I'm talking about students trying to find their way, a professor trying to figure out, white professor trying to figure out how to be more anti-racist. And in particular, we have to be doing the work in support of a progressive vision led by those most impacted, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. I'm going to close with the words of Black queer youth organizer and author of the book Unapologetic, Charlene Carruthers. She says, white liberals and progressives have a responsibility to organize their communities for justice using an explicitly anti-Black racism frame. There is no need to hide behind Black or people of color organizations. Commit yourself to organizing your white people and poor and working class white people. We are capable, meaning Black people, of organizing our own communities. She goes on to say, our children need everyday white folks to work harder to ensure that Black women don't have to worry about dying after failing to signal properly, walking while transgender, or trying to protect their children. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you so much. Okay, so I get to stop talking for a second because Marian is going to help lead us in the question and answer section. I am going to ask again, remind everybody that you can continue posting questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that, as well as unmuting yourself and asking some questions too. So Marian, there you go.
Yeah, this was great. Oh my goodness, this was great. I feel like, how when you're in church and the minister does their thing and then somebody asks you to make remarks and you like, I'm still trying to catch my breath. That's where I am right now. This was incredible. So right now I see that we have 2 questions in the chat. The first one is, what would you say about someone saying I'm brown versus I'm Black? And whoever wants to tackle that one can go ahead.
I'll take a first stab at it. I would first try to understand what the nuance is for them. I don't know if it's a Black or, when I say brown, I'm usually thinking someone from the Latino community, right? The Latinx community. But, what is the nuance for that person first and foremost? And then try to understand, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but what is the value of not being classified as Black? And I know that there are Black people who do not want to be called Black. And it is because they feel like there is a negative connotation to being called Black, that there is a lot of weight given to what it means to be Black, just by the meaning of the word itself, and how Black is often associated with things that are dirty, things that are evil, things that are corrupt. And they don't see the beauty in Blackness. And as I mentioned before, I'm a single mother. So, from the very beginning, and knowing, if you read, I'm forgetting her name. Why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria?
Beverly Tatum.
Yes, thank you. And she talks about at the age of 3 and 4, how kids start to recognize and distinguish color that early. It is how it is that we begin to allow that conversation to evolve, how we start to put value to it that makes the difference, right? So for this person, it would be starting to go back to that. What are some of the value pieces that you were given about just the terminology of being Black, and what does that mean for you? And even share my own of being Black connects me to African American and Black descended. For everyone who left the continent of Africa, it connects me to them because we have different ethnicities, believe it or not, right? We have different ethnicities among Black people. So that is a part of what binds us together, in my opinion. That is my experience. So that's probably, they wouldn't ask me again. But that would be what I would say.
Kind of what Doc was saying. I would always touch on the beauty of the diaspora itself and how Black is an adjective as much as it is an identity. And that word itself, again, going back to representation, like how it is represented and how you can kind of change the ideas and the representations that have existed that have all these negative connotations to them.
All right. So the next question is from Lynn. So Lynn lives in the country, about 2 hours away from the city, and wants to know how they can be engaged in this work in a meaningful way.
I'll say, you know, if you're white and rural, there's a lot of work to be done in that area. Surge is starting work out in rural, but I don't want to assume one way or another. So I would say if you're white, you know, Surge can support you to start doing some talking with your neighbors, but also because we're still on Zoom so much, getting support from folks in places where we do have Surge groups. And I will let somebody else speak to if you are a person of color.
And I'm wondering if the other people on the panel that are people of color assumed, like I did, that there was a white person asking that question. I mean, and I could have been wrong, but. And so we've dropped several resources in the chat as well. So educating yourself is always a first great step to getting engaged.
Can I say one thing, Mary? And that is find a place where you feel like you can, and I'm gonna start talking too much soon, but find a place where you feel like you can grow. That's the place you need to be, right? So in the beginning, especially as you're learning, you may find yourself in a bunch of different places so that you can understand exactly the kind of work that they're doing. So I'm hesitant to say one way, right? So you may want to find some really, you know, extremely progressive, maybe even militant kind of groups, right? And see if that's your fit. Or you can go somewhere that's a little bit more in the middle and a little bit more moderate. But I don't know. This is me not knowing you and knowing your style and knowing your flavor. So I would say, you know, go to some spaces that you feel like you would want to try it on for a little bit and then figure out and go deep.
Nice. Any other questions? And you can type or you can unmute and ask. We have a pretty manageable size, so.
And if you want to show us your faces, it'll make our conversation even more lively.
Okay, so let's see. Oscar Romero talked about being prophets of a future, not our own, that we are planting seeds that hold future promise. With that in mind, knowing you may never see the benefits of your labor, and in the context of the call out culture, how do you keep from getting discouraged in this work, and where do you find your motivation and or inspiration?
I'll start this one. I go back to complex community. Again, the beauty of Black network, but also of just diverse networks is if you're doing this work in a way that's authentic, in a way that is deeply connected to the individuals who will be impacted in the short and the long term, you will know it, because in those moments of being called out, you will also find that your complex community knows that you might need some love, that the energy needs to be directed in your way. And if you are rooted, as I believe Tamara said, rooted in knowing who you are, how you show up in this work, that's enough to get you through the day, is to know that the impact that you're making is sincere. And if you are being battered and losing yourself by call out culture, and you can't make it through, that's legitimate. There are certainly days when it is tough and hard and awful. But I think my challenge then would be, make sure you're in community, in real and deep and legitimate community. And if you are, those people will have your back.
For me, to answer directly with where I find my motivation, my inspiration, for me, it's through Sankofa, which is the idea of to reach back and retrieve, to reach back for the knowledge that we had, retrieve that knowledge, and then continue to share that. I am an elementary school teacher as well. So I teach special education, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and I am certified K-12. So for me, everything is about what I can pour into my students every single day, whether that be teaching them how to advocate for themselves, teaching them about maybe a different side of history that they have not been taught before, and allowing them to really critically analyze, even at their young age, a lot of the information that they've already been given, and asking them questions about if the information they've been given means something to them, or if it's just information that's been told to them. So for me, that would be where I get my inspiration, is seeing that although I know that they're in elementary school, so a lot of what I teach them I won't see for years, but this is the knowledge that they've had that experience at some point in their life.
I don't know if we all should share. You know, part of my motivation is right here on the screen. Both Farron and Nubia have been my students. And bam, oh my gosh. I mean, just look at them. That if that's not motivation, if that's not inspiration, I don't know what is. You know, I can't tell them what to think. I can't tell them what to do. But when they go out and they're making change in the world, I'm like, okay, that makes me want to work more. And again, I've got a 13-year-old who's upstairs being very quiet. And I will say, you know, she has worked with Marion Vassar for how many years has she worked with you?
4 or 5. She's been with me for a minute.
So she worked and did the social justice camp. And you know, you never know what's clicking. And someone had put in the chat, you know, how do you start with your kids? Give them books from the very beginning that talks about it. So one of her first books was about Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass and the conversation that they had, so that she understands. And there was another book about Brown and the work of him and his sons. And so those were things that we started out with her, just as well as any nursery rhymes that we would give. And to hear her talk now and the things that she shares and how it is that she works with her peers on these kinds of issues. And I give Marion credit. I take some credit. Her dad takes credit, you know, and her school has been really great about it. But those things, and even this conversation, those are things that are inspirational to me, motivate me.
Yeah, in the surge work, we find that because whiteness carries such a legacy of brutality and horror and oppression, for those of us who are white, it's important to remember that while they were few and always imperfect, there were white people from the beginning, who made a decision to not stand on the side of oppression. And that is really critical, because you know how they say, oh, well, those were the times back there. No, they weren't the times. There were some people who said, I am not going to put up with this, and I'm going to do. And so today too, you know, people will look back in 50 years and say, oh, well, those were the times. Unacceptable. It's like the inspiration has us, we have to choose at each moment which side we're on. And I feel like, you know, for me, knowing that there were people who have gone before me, that's part of my legacy, is inspiring.
Okay, so I feel like we have answered a little bit about how to get students engaged. So I'll go to the next question. I think there's another one. Yes, as a white ally and or accomplice, what are your feelings on where is the line between engaging in anti-racist work, dialogue, conversations, etc., but also being careful to not wanting to center whiteness and the white voice?
I mean, I can say something about that. The problem isn't that we have too many white people who are anti-racist. The problem is that we don't have enough. Now, there's a difference between white folks focusing on organizing more white people to support racial justice and thinking we should be in charge. You know, it's like white culture teaches white people, especially those of us with class privilege or gender privilege, that we know the best way, that we should be making the decisions. If we're going to make change, that change has to be anchored in the voices and the experiences of those most impacted. And when it comes to racism and white supremacy, it is Black and people of color, Indigenous people who have the experience and are going to have the best solutions that end up benefiting us all as a society. The problem is that racism is centered, whiteness is centered. It's not, the problem is not that there are too many white folks becoming anti-racist. And I find that sometimes that discussion becomes an excuse for white folks to say, oh yeah, I'm not getting involved because, you know, I just don't want to center myself. And it's like, that does nobody any good. It's like, but our work is not leading the anti-racist movement. It is doing the work in our own communities with white folks, our faith spaces, our classrooms, our families, etc.
Thank you. So I do not see any more questions. And we are at 6:14. So I'm going to turn it back over. Wait a minute. Okay, great way to end the Monday. I agree. I'm going to turn it back over to Nubia to give some announcements and talk about the next community conversation. Nubia, I think. Nubia, you're muted.
I was trying to share my screen and I did not unmute myself. That's what I did. My bad. Okay. So, really, we like to end these conversations with calls to action and just how do we get involved? We say this all the time, like, okay, so how are we getting involved now? We talk about learning about what's happening around us, but where are some good places to start? Because everybody is starting from a different place, right? So I show everybody, if you come to other community conversations before, I started with the screen that had a few folks on there, and then every single time we just add more and more. Some of these people have presented on previous panels as well. Surge has actually been on there since the beginning. Because we knew that we had white folks that wanted to get involved, and we were like, this is a great place to start because it has all of the resources you need to get started, and you can find some more. We also have Love Thy Belly. Please check that out, especially because we have the speakers in the space. We want to support the work that is already happening. But some others on this list, if you weren't here at prior community conversations, definitely support Black Market, which is our first for-profit Black grocery store, and Taunt, which is an open space for Black queer folks to write and be highlighted. We had Minda at our last panel. In case you missed that one, please go back and watch that. Definitely, you can support Queer Kentucky. You can support our own LGBT center. Lisa's in the audience right now. Urban League, La Casita Center, the West Louisville Women's Collaborative. We could keep going. And there are more. And as you get more, as you hear about more, share that, because there's always work to do. And we sometimes forget that in our closed circles that we live in, especially with the pandemic, because you only interact with the people that you have to see, which for most of us isn't as many people because of COVID, right? So that is our biggest call to action, because we don't tell you what to do. They'll tell you about the work that they're already doing. My dad, Dr. J. Blaine Hudson, if I wasn't going to mention him, I figured Tamara would. So one of us was going to do it. One of the things he used to say to me when I used to have my 18-year-old ideas about how I wanted to change the world, because I think all of us at 18 decided we were going to be the ones to change the world by ourselves. He would always ask me, well, what are all the other people around you doing? And of course, I hated that question, because I'm like, what do you mean? I'm talking about me, because I know what I'm going to do. And one of the things he would always say, which stands out to me now, is you really don't know what to do unless you understand what everybody else is doing. And because otherwise you're just reinventing the wheel, and you're impeding progress when you're reinventing the wheel. So there are lots of wheels turning. So let's tap into the wheels that are already turning. And maybe you do have to create something new, but you're creating and informed something new if you are. And that's a good place, because if you don't know what to do, a lot of us don't either. So that's great. Just a little bit of housekeeping at the end, because we're giving you the grace of like 45 minutes because it's Monday and we wanted to give gifts out today for free. We're giving you your Monday back. But there will be another community conversation. Our final community conversation is on success, failure, and the last piece. Oh my goodness, it's escaping me because it's Monday. But it's success, failure, and I know what it is. I'll tell you in a minute. But it is in June the 21st from 5 to 7, 6:37, depending on questions. And I can tell you that we will have President Neely Bendapudi on that panel, in case you were wondering. There will be other folks on that panel. But because she just re-entered the room, I wanted to make sure we highlighted that she will be on our final panel. You will get the links for registration to register for our next panel, because you registered for this one. We will also be sending out a survey about this panel that I personally would love for you to fill out, because I want to present as many of these as possible, but I really want to make sure that they are what you need and how you need them to be and when you need them to be. And I ask all of those questions on that survey, because otherwise I'm just doing these for myself or because I'm told to. And also it will put you in the registration for a free copy of the book. That's all I got. Marian, is there anything else we need to add to this conversation before we let people enjoy their Monday?
No, just a big thank you to everybody. Go out there and change the world.
Thank you.
Take
Please
care.
do. Thank
All
you.
right.